Lesson 78, opposites. The opposite of a number is the number that is on the opposite direction but in the same distance as a number from 0. So for example, the distance that is from 0 to 5 is the same distance that we have from 0 to negative 5. And so the opposite of 5 is negative 5, and the opposite of negative 5 is 5. So we can read this first example here as the opposite of 3. What is the opposite of 3? Is negative 3. Now, the second example we can read as the opposite of negative 3. What is the opposite of negative 3? Positive 3. Now, this one we have 3 negatives, so the opposite of negative 3, which in this case is again negative 3. And if we do one more, notice we're saying the opposite of this one. So the opposite of the opposite of the opposite of negative 3 is positive 3. Now, from here, we can get a rule, a nice thing to remember so that we do these exercises really easily. So the rule is that if you count how many negatives there are in an expression and there is an odd amount of negatives, then the answer is going to be negative. But if you count and there is an even amount of negatives, the answer is going to be positive. Now notice, I'm saying just count the number of negatives. The positives don't matter at all. So let's look at these examples. Here we have 1 and 2 negatives. So that's an even amount of negatives. So the answer is positive 5. Notice that I did not count the positive 5 because it doesn't affect the product. The only thing that affects the product is the negatives. In this other example, we have 4 negatives. So if I have 4 negatives, it's another even amount. So the answer is going to be, again, positive 8. In this last example, we also have 2 negatives, and the answer is going to be positive. Now let's do one example with an odd amount of negatives. In this example, I count, and there are 3 negatives. So because that one has 3 negatives, an odd amount of negatives, the answer is negative 10. And that's it. You just count how many there are and remember the rule. And that's that lesson. Very simple lesson. If you have any questions, write them in the comments. I'll see you in the next lesson.